Ma'am, step out of the car now.
Officer, this is my car, in my home. Please check my ID before proceeding.
I said step out. You're being detained for vehicle theft and resisting arrest.
I am Judge Patricia Williams, a federal judge. Please verify.
You either comply or things are really going to get ugly for you.
It was 2:15 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday when Judge Eleanor Grant pulled into her own driveway, the sun casting long shadows across the tree-lined street. Her black Mercedes glinted in the afternoon light, a reward for decades of tireless work in law and justice. She had just finished presiding over a complex civil rights case at the federal courthouse, and all she wanted now was to walk into her home, set down her briefcase, and enjoy a quiet evening with her family. But as she turned into her driveway, a police cruiser slowly rolled behind her, lights off, engine humming. Eleanor didn't think much of it at first. Her neighborhood had regular patrols, and she generally appreciated seeing law enforcement around. She reached for her briefcase, ready to step out, when the sharp click of a car door slamming stopped her in her tracks. "Ma'am, step out of the car now," a stern voice demanded. Eleanor rolled down her window and offered a calm smile. "Officer, this is my car. I live here. Please check my ID before proceeding." The officer, hands hovering near his holstered weapon, didn't respond. "I said step out. You're being detained for vehicle theft and resisting arrest." Eleanor's calm composure didn't falter. "I am Judge Eleanor Grant, a federal judge. Please verify my identity before doing anything further." What followed would soon become the most expensive traffic stop in American history. Before we dive deeper, I have a question for you. Where are you watching from right now? Seriously, I'd love to know. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. This story is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss a second. Back to the driveway. Officer Ryan Blake had been on the force for 8 years, a record that would later reveal a troubling pattern of complaints, most involving interactions with black motorists. On that Tuesday afternoon, though, he was convinced he was acting correctly. The Mercedes in front of him matched the description of a stolen vehicle, and in his mind, Eleanor's calm demeanor could only be a cover for deceit. Eleanor stepped out slowly, hands visible, maintaining the same composure that had carried her through decades in courtrooms across the country. "Officer, this is my vehicle, and this is my home. You can verify the license plate against the reported stolen car," she said. Blake's expression darkened. "Put your hands behind your back." "What crime am I being arrested for?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady. "Vehicle theft and resisting arrest," he replied, ignoring her repeated clarifications. Within minutes, the situation escalated. Eleanor's neighbors noticed the commotion immediately. Mrs. Linda Carter, watering her front garden across the street, pulled out her phone to record. She had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years and knew exactly who the woman in the patrol car was. Meanwhile, Mr. Thomas Green, walking his dog, recognized Eleanor immediately from a prior civil case. He approached cautiously. "Officer, she's a federal judge." "You've made a mistake," Green said. Blake waved him off. "Step back. Mind your business. I have a stolen vehicle report." Backup was called, and soon 2 more patrol cars arrived, sirens flashing, drawing dozens of neighbors out onto the street. Eleanor, sitting in the back of the patrol car, felt the weight of every eye on her. Her wrists burned where the handcuffs bit into her skin, but her composure never wavered. She understood the system intimately. What was happening wasn't just a personal insult. It was a constitutional violation. Officer Olivia Hayes, a 12-year veteran, arrived and immediately sensed the error. Approaching the car, she saw Eleanor sitting professionally, calm, and well-dressed, clearly not the criminal described in the stolen car report. She radioed for verification, and within minutes, dispatch confirmed that Eleanor Grant was indeed a sitting federal judge. Blake's reaction was defensive rather than apologetic. "She should have identified herself properly," he muttered. But Eleanor, removing the handcuffs with red marks on her wrists, looked him straight in the eye. "This was not a misunderstanding," she said. "You violated my constitutional rights. What you did erodes public trust in law enforcement. I will pursue every legal remedy available." The neighbors, many of whom had recorded the incident, approached her with support. Mrs. Carter handed over her phone footage, and Mr. Green provided a written statement. Blake, unaware of the storm he had unleashed, left the scene thinking it would blow over. But the next day, things escalated. Eleanor called in sick to court for the first time in years, carefully documenting everything while consulting civil rights attorney Marcus Bell. Word spread quickly through the legal community. Police supervisors reviewed the dashcam footage, and what they saw made their stomachs drop. A federal judge was detained for over 35 minutes purely because of her race. Sergeant Henry Collins and Chief Laura Bennett were immediately involved. The footage painted a clear picture of misconduct, showing Blake ignoring repeated clarifications and acting aggressively despite multiple witnesses. Meanwhile, Blake filed his own report, sanitized and misleading, attempting to downplay the incident. Eleanor's attorney filed a federal lawsuit 1 week after the traffic stop, alleging violations of her Fourth and 14th Amendment rights. The complaint named Blake and Collins for inadequate supervision and the entire police department, highlighting patterns of systemic misconduct. Headlines exploded. A sitting federal judge suing her own community's police department? Unprecedented. Civil rights organizations and legal experts weighed in, praising Eleanor's courage. The NAACP called it a clear example of racial profiling at every level of society. Federal authorities monitored the situation closely, and local activists began organizing rallies in support of the judge, drawing hundreds of residents demanding accountability. As the news spread, Blake was placed on administrative leave. Internal investigations revealed a history of misconduct, and ultimately, Chief Bennett terminated him. Eleanor Grant, meanwhile, remained steadfast, determined to see justice served, not just for herself, but for all those affected by racial bias in law enforcement. The incident, brief as it had been, set off a chain reaction. Lawsuits, investigations, and public scrutiny all swirled around the department. And while Eleanor was vindicated, the fight for systemic change was only beginning. The week following her arrest felt surreal to Judge Eleanor Grant. Though she was used to intense courtroom battles, nothing in her decades of legal experience had prepared her for being the victim of blatant racial profiling in her own driveway. Every detail of that Tuesday afternoon laid over in her mind. The handcuffs biting into her wrists, Officer Ryan Blake's dismissive tone, and the curious and horrified faces of her neighbors. She spent hours reviewing the dashcam footage, organizing witness statements, and speaking with civil rights attorney Marcus Bell. Marcus Bell was calm but firm. "Eleanor," he said during one of their early meetings, "this case is stronger than anything I've seen in years. We have video, witnesses, and evidence of a pattern of misconduct. The department underestimated what they were dealing with. This isn't just a personal victory. It's about sending a message to the entire force." Eleanor nodded, her eyes steady. "I understand, Marcus, but I also know this will get ugly. Blake isn't just a random officer. He's entrenched in the system, and the department will fight every claim. I'm prepared for that." The lawsuit was filed 1 week after the incident. It named Officer Blake and Sergeant Henry Collins for failing to supervise properly and the entire police department, alleging violations of her Fourth and 14th Amendment rights. Immediately, the case became front-page news. Television crews lined the streets outside her home, neighbors held interviews, and civil rights organizations rallied in support. Eleanor, however, focused on the legal details, ensuring every piece of evidence was meticulously prepared. Inside the police department, chaos reigned. Chief Laura Bennett watched the footage over and over, disbelief etched on her face. "I can't believe this happened," she muttered. She knew Blake's past complaints were troubling, but seeing a federal judge being detained based solely on racial assumptions left her shaken. Sergeant Collins tried to defend his previous actions. "Chief, we have procedures." "He was following protocol," he said. Bennett shook her head. "No, Henry, he wasn't. He ignored witnesses, ignored identification, and ignored the law. This is systemic negligence, not protocol. We've got weeks of public backlash coming. And this officer—" She gestured to the screen showing Blake arguing with Eleanor in the dashcam footage. "He's done." Meanwhile, Blake hired his own attorney, hoping to protect his career. But even his lawyer admitted the evidence was damning. "Ryan, the dashcam, the witness statements, your personnel file, it doesn't look good," his attorney said bluntly. "Your chances of keeping your job are slim. You also need to prepare for civil liability. This could get expensive." Back at Eleanor's home, her neighbors were more than just witnesses, they were allies. Mrs. Linda Carter, who had recorded the encounter, shared every frame of video with Marcus Bell. Mr. Thomas Green provided detailed written accounts. Others, previously hesitant to speak out, stepped forward, describing similar encounters with Officer Blake over the years. Each new statement painted a broader picture. Racial profiling was not a one-time error. It was a consistent pattern. Eleanor felt the weight of responsibility acutely. "Marcus, this isn't just about me," she said quietly. "If a federal judge can be treated like this, think about what happens to everyday citizens. We have to get this right." Marcus nodded. "Exactly. And that's why we're going to be meticulous. Every violation, every misstep will be documented. We'll show this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was systemic misconduct enabled by negligent supervision." As the lawsuit moved through the courts, local activists organized rallies outside the police department. Hundreds of people, many of them black, carried signs demanding justice. "No more profiling," they shouted. "Accountability now." The media coverage was relentless, highlighting not just Eleanor's experience, but the broader implications for the community. Inside the courtroom, preparations were intense. Judge Grant, who had spent years presiding over cases involving police misconduct, now found herself on the other side. She watched as her legal team subpoenaed years of traffic stop data, complaint records, and training materials. The evidence revealed patterns that were hard to ignore. Black drivers were stopped at disproportionately higher rates, searches were more frequent, and arrests were often escalated unnecessarily. Officer Blake's own personnel record showed repeated complaints about racial bias and excessive force. The first major deposition was scheduled. Eleanor sat across from Ryan Blake in a quiet conference room. The tension was palpable. Blake avoided her gaze, nervously fidgeting with his hands. "Officer Blake," Marcus Bell began, "you were the one who detained Judge Eleanor Grant on February 12th. Can you explain why you ignored her repeated attempts to identify herself?" Blake shifted uncomfortably. I was following procedure. The car matched a stolen vehicle report. I had to act. I couldn't just take her word for it." Marcus leaned forward. "So even when multiple witnesses, neighbors, and dashcam footage showed the situation clearly, you continued to detain a federal judge, and you failed to verify the stolen car report before handcuffing her." Blake hesitated. His lawyer gave him a subtle nudge, but he remained silent. "Answer the question, officer," Marcus pressed. Blake muttered, I thought I was doing my job." "That's not good enough," Eleanor said calmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Your job is to uphold the law, not to assume guilt based on race. What you did was illegal, and you're responsible for it." Blake's face reddened. For the first time, he looked like a man confronting the consequences of his actions. The courtroom battle would stretch over months. Depositions revealed more concerning details about the department. 3 other officers had similar patterns of bias, disciplinary actions were minimal or non-existent, and training on constitutional rights and racial bias was basic at best. Eleanor's legal team meticulously documented every failure. Outside the courtroom, the city administration felt the pressure mounting. Mayor Karen Ellis announced a review of police practices, promised reforms, and pledged to implement implicit bias training. The mayor also appointed a civilian oversight board to ensure accountability. But Eleanor knew better. True change wouldn't happen without the weight of the lawsuit pushing the department. As the trial approached, settlement talks began. The city's insurance company wanted to resolve the matter quietly, offering $250,000, a sum Eleanor immediately rejected. Marcus Bell countered with $2 million, demanding both compensation for her suffering and guarantees of meaningful reforms. Negotiations dragged on for weeks. At home, Eleanor kept her focus. Her family supported her fully. Her daughter, a first-year law student, insisted on reading every document. Her husband, a physician, was furious and wanted immediate action, but Eleanor calmly reminded them that meticulous preparation was the key to long-term justice. Every day, Eleanor's resolve strengthened. She had seen injustice up close as a judge, but now she experienced it personally, and she was determined that Officer Blake's actions would not go unpunished, not just for her, but for everyone vulnerable to racial profiling in the city. The courthouse buzzed with an energy Eleanor Grant had rarely seen in her decades on the bench. This time, she was no longer the judge. She was the plaintiff. The media packed the hallways, reporters whispering into microphones, cameras rolling as courthouse staff struggled to maintain order. Eleanor walked into the courtroom with her usual calm poise, but inside, a quiet fire burned. This was about more than money. It was about holding Officer Ryan Blake and the entire police department accountable. The first day of the trial was tense. Judge Eleanor Grant watched as Blake was sworn in. He sat stiffly, his lawyer hovering nearby, eyes darting toward her every so often. Eleanor's attorney, Marcus Bell, began laying out the case with meticulous clarity, showing the dashcam footage, photographs, and witness statements. Each clip, each statement reinforced the same undeniable truth. Eleanor had been detained for no reason other than the color of her skin. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional scribble of notes. Eleanor felt the weight of every neighbor, every witness, and every black motorist who had ever faced unjust stops in the city. She knew they were all counting on her. Blake's attorney tried to undermine the case, suggesting that Eleanor should have identified herself sooner, or that Blake had followed protocol. But Marcus Bell was ready. She did identify herself, multiple times. She provided her name, her position, and asked for verification. Officer Blake ignored her. Witnesses saw it. The dash cam shows it. Protocol was not followed. During cross-examination, Marcus asked Blake about his past complaints. Officer Blake, how many times have you been reported for racial bias or excessive force? Blake shifted uncomfortably. I don't recall exact numbers. 14 times, Marcus pressed, holding up the personnel file. 14 documented complaints, 12 involving racial bias. How does that reflect on your judgment that day? Blake avoided eye contact, mumbling, I was doing my duty. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. Doing your duty doesn't mean ignoring the law, Officer Blake. It doesn't mean handcuffing someone in their own driveway based on assumptions. Justice requires more than assumptions. It requires facts. You failed. The courtroom murmured, and the tension between Eleanor and Blake was palpable. For the first time, the officer realized that he was facing not just a lawsuit but a public reckoning. Every witness, every neighbor who came forward, every piece of video evidence reminded him of how irreversible his actions were. Outside the courtroom, supporters of Eleanor gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for all," "Stop racial profiling," and "Accountability matters." Hundreds of citizens had come forward, some sharing their own stories of harassment, illegal stops, and bias. Their presence amplified the stakes, reminding the city and the police department that this trial was not just about a single incident. It was about the culture of law enforcement in the community. The prosecution introduced a key witness, Officer Olivia Hayes, the veteran officer who had recognized Eleanor's identity immediately. She described the events with calm professionalism. "I saw a woman in the back of a patrol car, calm, composed, and clearly not fitting the description of a stolen vehicle suspect. I immediately questioned Officer Blake and requested verification. When the dispatch confirmed her identity, I expected her release, but Blake resisted. He ignored witnesses and refused to follow procedure. Blake's attorney attempted to discredit Hayes, suggesting she overstepped or was biased, but the dashcam footage corroborated her account perfectly. Every pause, every gesture, every word matched what Hayes had described. Next came Eleanor's neighbors. Mrs. Linda Carter testified about recording the incident. "I saw everything," she said. She got out of her car calmly. She asked him to verify her identity. He handcuffed her anyway. "I started recording immediately because I knew this wasn't right. I've never seen anyone treated this way in our neighborhood." Thomas Green, another neighbor, spoke next. "I know her personally. I've seen her in court. I tried to tell Officer Blake he was wrong, that she was a federal judge. He ignored me and threatened to arrest me. I've never felt so powerless watching a public servant being mistreated in her own driveway." The jury watched closely, and a low hum of outrage spread through the courtroom. The evidence was unassailable. Officer Blake had ignored procedure, ignored witnesses, and relied on bias rather than facts. Then came a dramatic moment during the trial. Marcus Bell called Blake to the stand again, this time confronting him directly with the impact of his actions. "Officer Blake, how did you feel knowing you detained a sitting federal judge for over 35 minutes? Blake swallowed hard. I don't know. I thought I was doing my job." "Do you understand now that your actions violated her constitutional rights?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Do you accept responsibility for the humiliation, physical pain from the handcuffs, and the community distrust your actions caused?" Blake lowered his head. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor, sitting at the plaintiff's table, felt a surge of relief mixed with lingering anger. Justice was being served, but the system's failure was undeniable. Outside, the media coverage intensified. Civil rights organizations praised Eleanor's courage. Legal experts analyzed the trial, calling it a potential landmark for racial profiling cases. Professor Linda Martinez, a respected civil rights scholar, stated, "This case exemplifies systemic issues that ordinary citizens face every day. A federal judge being detained underscores the gravity of the problem." Back in the courtroom, settlement negotiations quietly continued alongside the trial. The city initially offered $250,000, a fraction of what Marcus Bell demanded. Eleanor refused. Weeks of back and forth followed. Marcus pushed for $2 million and guaranteed reforms, while city officials tried to minimize both the financial and public relations impact. As the trial approached its final week, Eleanor reflected on the past 18 months. She had endured the public spectacle, watched her abuser lose credibility, and seen the legal system hold someone accountable. Yet she knew the fight wasn't only about personal victory. It was about ensuring no other citizen, regardless of race, would face what she had endured. Her resolve never wavered. She reviewed her notes daily, prepared for every courtroom exchange, and consulted her attorney constantly. Every deposition, every witness, and every piece of evidence reminded her that justice required perseverance. And then came the final courtroom confrontation, a tense, almost electric moment between Eleanor and Blake as the jury watched. Marcus Bell leaned forward, holding Blake's gaze. "Officer Blake, this isn't just about procedure. It's about the trust every citizen places in those sworn to protect them. You broke that trust, and now the law will hold you accountable." Blake, silent and pale, finally met Eleanor's eyes. In that moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor's calm intensity conveyed a message Blake could never ignore. She was not just seeking money or revenge. She was demanding justice. The final day of the trial arrived with an electric tension that could be felt outside the courthouse. Reporters crowded the sidewalks, cameras flashing every time someone entered the building. Eleanor Grant walked through the doors with her usual composure, yet inside, her heart raced. After months of testimony, depositions, and public scrutiny, the moment of truth had come. She would finally hear if the law recognized the injustice she endured that day in her own driveway. The courtroom was packed. Citizens who had rallied in her support sat shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the proceedings. Officer Ryan Blake, once so confident, now appeared uneasy and defensive. His attorney tried to mask the anxiety, but it was clear Blake was realizing the magnitude of the consequences awaiting him. Marcus Bell stood before the jury for the final time, summarizing the case with precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this case isn't about one officer making a mistake. It's about accountability, fairness, and the constitutional rights guaranteed to every citizen." Judge Eleanor Grant was detained for over 35 minutes in her own driveway simply because of her race. Witnesses saw it, dashcam footage proves it, and her calm, professional conduct shows that there was no justification for what happened. The law requires justice, and today you have the opportunity to deliver it. The jury listened intently, watching the dashcam footage once more, seeing Eleanor's composed demeanor contrasted with Blake's aggressive approach. The neighbors' testimonies were recounted. Mrs. Linda Carter, who had recorded the entire encounter, and Thomas Green, who had tried to intervene. Their statements painted a clear picture of misconduct, bias, and negligence. Blake was called to testify one last time. His voice was hesitant as he recounted his actions. I thought I was doing my job," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause harm." Marcus Bell leaned forward. "Officer Blake, your intent is not the issue. Your actions violated the rights of a federal judge and eroded trust in law enforcement. You must be held accountable. Do you accept that?" Blake looked down, unable to meet Eleanor's steady gaze. "Yes," he whispered. The jury retired to deliberate. Outside the courtroom, the media and supporters waited in tense anticipation. Eleanor remained calm, speaking briefly to her attorney, Marcus Bell, about the importance of justice not just for her, but for the broader community. 2 hours later, the jury returned. The foreperson stood and spoke clearly, every word echoing in the hushed courtroom. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Judge Eleanor Grant, and award damages in the amount of $910,000. A wave of relief and vindication washed over Eleanor. Months of preparation, frustration, and personal endurance had culminated in a definitive victory. The courtroom erupted in subdued applause. Eleanor remained composed, but her eyes glistened as she quietly acknowledged the significance of the verdict. Officer Blake's fate was immediate and severe. His career in law enforcement, already tarnished by prior complaints and this high-profile case, was effectively over. Chief Laura Bennett, having reviewed the case thoroughly, confirmed his termination. Blake would lose his pension, his reputation, and any chance to return to the force. He'd become a cautionary tale of unchecked bias and procedural negligence. For Eleanor, the victory extended beyond personal vindication. The settlement required the police department to implement substantial reforms. Mandatory training on racial bias, updated procedures for verifying identity during traffic stops, and regular audits to ensure accountability. These changes would prevent future incidents and send a clear message that constitutional rights must be upheld, regardless of race. Eleanor didn't stop there. She established a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct, using part of her settlement to provide resources, legal assistance, and advocacy. Justice delayed is not always justice denied, she explained in a press conference following the verdict. But when it arrives, it must be meaningful and lasting. The ripple effects of the case were far-reaching. Other victims of Officer Blake's misconduct came forward, joining class action lawsuits that challenged broader patterns of bias within the department. Recruitment suffered, public trust was tested, and the city faced mounting pressure to reform its policing policies. Yet Eleanor's steadfast commitment ensured that change would come. In her home, Eleanor reflected on the events of the past 18 months. She had endured humiliation, anger, and disbelief, yet she had emerged stronger. Her experience had not just exposed systemic failures, it had highlighted the power of resilience, evidence, and unwavering commitment to justice. Neighbors like Mrs. Linda Carter and Thomas Green were recognized for their courage in documenting and speaking out. Their actions, though seemingly small at the moment, had been instrumental in holding Officer Blake accountable. The community, once shaken by the incident, began to see the potential for meaningful change. Eleanor's family celebrated cautiously, understanding the significance of her victory, but also recognizing the ongoing challenges ahead. Her daughter, inspired by her mother's perseverance, felt a renewed sense of purpose in pursuing law. Her husband, who had supported her every step of the way, acknowledged the deep impact of racial injustice even on those at the highest levels of the judiciary. In the months following the verdict, the city implemented the mandated reforms. Police officers underwent rigorous training, supervisors were held accountable, and community oversight became a standard practice. Eleanor continued her advocacy, speaking at events, participating in panels, and mentoring young lawyers committed to civil rights. The story of Judge Eleanor Grant and the $910,000 verdict became a landmark case, frequently cited in discussions of police misconduct, racial profiling, and constitutional rights. It proved that even the highest levels of authority could be challenged when injustice occurred, and that courage, evidence, and perseverance could hold even law enforcement accountable. Eleanor often reflected on that day in her driveway, the fear, the humiliation, and the injustice, but also on the extraordinary outcome. She had turned personal suffering into a broader fight for justice, leaving a lasting legacy for her community, the legal system, and victims of police misconduct everywhere. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it arrives slowly, painfully, and with intense struggle. But when it finally comes, it can change everything. For Judge Eleanor Grant, that change was profound, lasting, and undeniable.